This video is brought to you by Squarespace. When it comes to websites, online stores, etc., there's no place to build a beautiful online presence like Squarespace. Gaspar Noé has been an exhausting filmmaker to think about these last few years. I hated, and I mean hated, Irreversible the first time I saw it. Now I kind of appreciate it. I liked Love the first time I saw it. Now I think it's kind of dumb. I loved Climax the first time I saw it. Now it's maybe my favorite movie of all time. And I didn't really like Enter the Void the first time I saw it. Then I grew to love it, and then I rewatched it, and I really didn't like it. Tomorrow, who knows? Enter the Void could be my new favorite movie. Who knows anything anymore? I don't know how I feel about him yet. I've been thinking about his work for like 3 years, and I still don't have a definitive opinion, when usually I can have some sort of feeling about a filmmaker after one movie. That's because when I watch his movies, all I can think about is, wow, this is really skillful filmmaking. He is using movement, color, sound, and performance all in such an intentionally jarring way, and it's evident he knows what he's doing. Love it or hate it, his style has been replicated more than people think, but there isn't any clear Gaspar Noé ripoff because nobody is confident enough to really go the places he goes with it. And there's a good reason for that, because he will go to some really stupid places with it for the sake of trying something new. And that's where the conflicting feelings come in. I love his movies, but I also think they can be extremely corny, offensive, self-indulgent, and I wouldn't have them any other way. As a person, I think he's a bit of a narcissistic ass, but I wish him all the best. He seems in good spirits these days, and for some reason that really warms my heart, because I'll take 60-year-old sober Gaspar who likes to dance over 30-year-old edgelord Gaspar any day. And in the process of making this video, I've seen some interviews where this guy says the most eye-rolling things I've ever heard in my life. But this video isn't about Gaspar Noé, the guy. It's about his movies, which you could easily say are just an extension of him, referring to that one time he named a baby in his movie Gaspar, and in the same movie wrote that it was one of the best names. Truly a Kanye West level power move at that point. But anyway, I'm gonna stray as far away as possible from Gaspar Noé as the person, because I think his work is the more fascinating thing to talk about here. Way more fascinating than it has any right to be. There's a common criticism for Gaspar Noé, that his films serve no purpose other than to shock, which is a valid point considering one of the earliest posters for Climax rides on the appeal that you presumably hate his work. But try this one. Maybe a little corny, but come on, it's kind of a funny poster. And I wanted to make this video because I do think there's a point to his movies. A movie can say close to nothing, but when the form itself is this extreme, that's enough to serve a greater purpose, and is, in my opinion, actually saying something in the process. My case for Gaspar Noé's forceful yet surface-level cinema is that it challenges the film form, recontextualizes the worst of the human condition, and uses shock and horror as a means of self-reflection. Let's get into it. In Gaspar Noé's feature film debut, I Stand Alone, there's a block of text that shows up that reads, "You have 30 seconds to leave the theater." Text that speaks directly to the audience is nothing new or groundbreaking in film. Noé's use of text feels more like a statement, or in this case, a command. Much of this isn't anything new either. Godard, who Noé is blatantly a fan of, was experimenting with text as a means of telling a story visually and doing so in a way that breaks the fourth wall. But Gaspar Noé treats it like he's in the film himself, with absolutely no subtlety, which is no surprise. He's inserted himself jacking off in the background before, he's acted in scenes, he's named someone Gaspar twice now, which is, in my opinion, kind of obnoxious and cringeworthy at this point, but isn't necessarily pointless. These insertions say something about how he looks at his movies, a lens. The effect of breaking the fourth wall stylistically is treating the film almost like an amusement park ride, or a gimmick. And I mean that in a more complimentary and literal sense than Scorsese talking about Marvel movies. I mean, Noé's films literally feel like roller coasters, the way his camera twirls and loops around the room. Think William Castle, who for his 1959 film The Tingler would place buzzers under theater seats as a means of literally shocking the audience. Or famed Prince of Puke / fellow Gaspar Noé fanboy John Waters, who for his 1981 film Polyester packaged it with an odorama card to scratch and sniff while watching the film, which is an insane move for someone with the title Prince of Puke to go through with. These films don't shy away from their intentions, clearly. There's very little up to interpretation. That's what makes them a gimmick. The goal here is to feel shocked and to submit yourself to the experience. I don't want to make it sound like I'm talking down on this kind of filmmaking either. Gimmick doesn't necessarily have to be a negative term, because there is actual artistic skill being done here. And when we're speaking about this style of filmmaking, there's nobody that wants you to know that he wants you to run out of the theater. quite like Gaspar Noé. The point is, shock in film is nothing new, but it is something rare, and more importantly, it's a challenge. I admire the work of Noé because he doesn't really inject himself, I guess, past the text on screen and that one poster. Like, he'll put himself in the movie, but that's not to add to the shock. That's out of either ego or some other philosophical meaning that, quite frankly, I have no interest trying to figure out. What I'm saying is, all love to Castle and Waters, these are both geniuses in their own right, but shock is difficult to pull off nowadays as is, and Noé finds ways to shock audiences purely off the filmmaking, no need for odorama cards and seat buzzers. And that's an impressive feat considering he's still doing it. No, people aren't walking out of his films the way they used to, maybe because those going to see Gaspar Noé films at this point know what they're getting into, but speaking as someone who has enjoyed Noé's work for years, Vortex, his latest film, was still shocking. Not in the traditional sense though, this isn't exactly midnight movie material the way his others are, but it's because he managed to take a more personal route with it while still horrifying the viewer that made it feel like new territory for him, which I think gets to the root of his genius. He has his tricks like the flickering lights and the nauseating camera, but Noé never really repeats himself. A self-proclaimed provocateur would never remake Climax or Enter the Void despite their critical successes, because it means he would fail at showing us something new. He would fail at shocking us. It's why he was kind of disappointed at the positive reception to Climax, and then followed it up with a film that shoots like 30 minutes of strobe light at the audience, and then with a brutally intimate look at dementia that's more of a drama than a horror movie, but in my opinion is still very much a horror movie. Noé has challenged the form by remaining shocking despite having established provocateur status, discovering new ways of luring an audience in while also getting under their skin. But what's more impressive is that in the process he's still regarded as a relatively respected filmmaker. His approach may be surface level, but the films themselves don't just come from a desire to shock people. They come from real fears rooted in reality, which makes them as effective as they are. I recently caught his latest film, Vortex, at the New York Film Festival. It's his most down-to-earth by far, but it's still extremely unsettling as it tells the story of an old couple that lives their final days together, one struggling with dementia, the other with a heart problem. Sounds like a real romp, no? The film is 2 hours and 15 minutes, and it is a grueling watch. It is not enjoyable in the slightest, and I am glad it isn't. Moments that would usually feel too uncomfortable or too redundant to the audience are held on rather than cut away from. This forcefulness makes Vortex both uncomfortable and effective. To some it may seem tedious, but to me this is a one of a kind that I'll probably never watch again in my life. Vortex horrified me from just how real it all felt. Personally, I've never died, so I can't speak on the accuracy of this film's portrayal of death, but the slow, painful, and uncontrollable descent into nothing felt so visceral. And the thing is, I trust Noé here. About a year and a half before its premiere at Cannes, Noé suffered a brain hemorrhage that almost killed him. His mother and grandmother both died from brain issues as well. The film not only draws from his experience with specific mental diseases, but it also draws from his own experience with death, something that he's clearly seen up close a few times by now. And knowing his style and his attention to perspective, you get a really hard movie to watch here. It took me Vortex to realize that this is something that's in all of his films. This up-close perspective on real-life horrors. I don't want to say it's personal, especially if we're including Irreversible in the conversation, but it's very real. Much of Noé's shock doesn't come from a specific event, rather the pacing that comes with the event. And because we just mentioned it, I feel like now's a good time to bring up Irreversible. Irreversible is his hardest film to watch in my opinion, and it should be considering it's all about a rape. It is one of the most horrifyingly real movies ever made, and I owe a lot of that to Gaspar's choice to just hold on that scene in one shot without cutting away. The violence of that scene, plus the violence in another scene, and the extremely nauseating cinematography and sound design in this film really shakes you to your core. This film has been like one of the most controversial things since its release, so I really don't feel like I need to add much as far as what happens in the movie. What I want to say is that my distaste for this film comes from the fact that I don't think Noé spends as much time wanting to understand the woman in the story, Alex, in the way he should to give this film the full picture it needs. What happens to her is horrific, and the film is without a doubt more concerned with the brutality of the men surrounding her than it is her, which does not take away from how gut gut-wrenchingly effective the film is. I just wish this movie was more than just disturbing. I want it to feel like it's saying something more about the whole thing, you know? But as I've kind of established, Noé is pretty surface level with his storytelling, and it's silly, especially with his earlier edgy work, to expect a full character portrait. That's just my take though, and that's not the point here. The point is, despite the success of I Stand Alone, Irreversible was the film that really shot Noé's name into conversation, as it was, unsurprisingly, extremely controversial when it premiered at Cannes. And it made a splash because it forced the viewer to sit there with the character. It was a daring and aggressive direction nobody had really experienced in film before, partially because of just how simple it was to just leave the camera there. It made it brutal. It wasn't through the eyes of Alex, but it did put you in her mind, her world. He does the same thing with Enter the Void when he puts us in Oscar's head, both literally with blinking and spiritually as he soars over the city and has sex with his sister. He does this in Love with sex. He does this in Climax with a bad high. He does this in Lux Eterna with strobe lights, and he does this in Vortex with dementia. His films are less about watching characters and more about being them. I'm not gonna be any more of a Gaspar Noé fanboy than I've already been in this video and defend that choice for all his films. I think in retrospect, Love should be sexier than it is, considering it's a Gaspar Noé movie about sex. That movie should in general have a stronger narrative to tie it all together, and I've danced around actually talking about that movie on purpose, but for the most part, his films have always very successfully put you in the characters' heads, even when those characters feel hilariously empty, which can make the movie a bit of a drag. But again, character studies isn't really his thing, clearly. Can you really be surprised at this point? And when that's your thing, putting yourself in people's minds, it really begs the question, why? Cool, put us in the character's perspective. What does that tell us? What are you saying about that character, about this horrific event? Why does this dance party matter? It matters because it's bringing you closest to life's most extreme lows without actually having to experience them yourself. And to specify, these aren't lows like divorce or losing a job. Noé's nightmares are cerebral and all have to do with losing control, what happens when you unwillingly let your guard down, and how you respond accordingly. And by putting you as directly as possible in that position, his movies force the viewer to reevaluate their own response. Climax, hilarious as this may sound, has always been a very personal movie for me. To those who don't know about this movie, it's about a group of dancers who all accidentally take spiked sangria and proceed to have the worst night of their goddamn lives. Now, I've never had any sort of psychedelic drug, no, and I actually am not very good at dancing at all. But drugs do scare me a lot because the idea of me not wanting to be high anymore and being high, that just sounds like hell. I'm someone who doesn't like not being in control. It's why I've been doing a job like YouTube for as long as I have. And to be under the influence is sort of taking away a lot of awareness. That's very scary to me. And that's why Climax was just the most nightmarish thing I had ever experienced. And I think it's so effective in that because he doesn't try to understand these characters for even a second. It is just about the situation. Maybe the best part about this movie is that it happens to a group of dancers, not only because it allows the film to shoot, personally, the best dance scene I think I've ever seen in a movie, the kind of dance scene that reminds you why it's so great to be alive, but it's also maybe the perfect group of people for this situation to happen to. In a really great analysis of the movie for Forbes, Travis Bean writes, "To Noé, a drug trip can be scary, but also fulfilling. The trip can be what you allow it to become, and what you allow it to become is ultimately a reflection of yourself. You are either ready to realize your quote-unquote art, or your insecurities have taken over," which gets back to that opening quote, "Existence is a fleeting illusion. Even if you're alive, you have a job, you have family and friends. Are you truly living? Are you at peace with yourself? Do your own insecurities and uncertainties constantly get in the way?" It takes an art form entirely built on how you control your body, and it puts them in a situation where they lose control of that. As some of them accept it, you see a sort of creative awakening with their movements, like their true artistry is inside them all along. But as others crumble, you see them question who they are and where they actually belong.
If you couldn't dance, what would you do? Suicide?
It's why I consider most of his films kind of beautiful, despite being nightmarish. Like 6 Watches Deep, I do consider Climax a comfort movie. And it's because in times like these, especially in this movie, you watch people without control find relief through romance, through artistic expression, through music, nature. It is kind of moving to watch someone see a forest wallpaper and feel immediate relief. And I believe that relief, and it really speaks to the beauty of the world we live in when we consider ourselves free. You have to start to question his cerebral perspective approach when you compare it to like A video game. I mean, Enter the Void literally cuts between the first and third person point of view for the entire movie. When asked about this connection in Interview magazine, Noé simply goes, "Yes, that's funny. I am not a video game addict, but I had played one in an arcade where people are walking around. I had to shoot zombies, and one zombie would appear, then 4, and then 100, and suddenly I felt like I was inside Night of the Living Dead. It was like a nightmare. It was exciting." Anyway, like most interviews, he doesn't really answer the question, which is to say I think Noé appreciates the excitement of video games, but feels it's something entirely separate from film. Something like Bandersnatch is fun and new, and I can appreciate it for what it is, but nobody talks about Bandersnatch anymore because it has about as much introspection as a random generic video game. The same can be applied to something like Hardcore Henry, maybe the closest thing we can compare to Gaspar Noé because of its first-person perspective. But Hardcore Henry, while a pretty cool technical achievement that bridges the gap, doesn't really challenge or shock you in any particular way. Which doesn't make it a bad movie, it just isn't something that sticks with you. I mean, how many of you just now went, "Oh my god, I forgot about Hardcore Henry"? The point is, Noé's films, unlike video games, trap the viewer. The whole point of a game is control, but Noé understands that one of the most powerful things about film is the power the director holds on the audience. Which is why walkouts aren't uncommon for Gaspar Noé. I mean, for Irreversible, arguably his most famous film, it's rumored that at the Cannes premiere, hundreds of people walked out of the theater. As someone who has seen the movie, I would say that's pretty expected for something like that. And as much as he encourages walking out, I mean, I'm convinced he paces his movies like he has all the time in the world because he knows only his true fans will sit through the whole thing. There is something to say about the ending of a Gaspar Noé movie, and more specifically about you getting to the end of it. In a review of I Stand Alone for Academic, Kim Morgan writes, "It attacks one's senses with such transgressive power that by its end one feels flustered, simultaneously full and empty. I Stand Alone rattles in your brain long after the movie's disquieting end." In Brian Formo's Letterboxd review for Climax, he writes, "What Noé doesn't do is give us that odd drug feeling of coming to and realizing that everything that was freaking you out was all in your mind, the normalcy coming back into your brain with enhanced precision, the self-deprecating laugh that accompanies it. And without that release, Noé is content on just leaving us with a headache, a cinematic hangover because the director cruelly provided no water because his movie was just circling the drain the whole time."
It's a little bit like being art mugged. You know, all this stuff goes on and rattles around in your head, you go, wow, and then when you try and assess afterwards what it all adds up to, it doesn't really all add up to very much.
Clearly, one of Noé's most violating tricks is the way he ends his movies. He doesn't tie up loose ends in any particularly satisfying ways, which, like Formo said, leaves you with kind of a headache. In Climax, he'll reveal who spiked the sangria, but it doesn't make up for the irreversible damage the night did to its guests and us. It argues that these nightmares, these horrific events, have no actual meaning. To place some sort of value onto them, to say the characters grew from these events, would be downplaying the massive negative effect they have on the characters and on us. I'd be lying if I said Noé's work isn't deeply flawed and hasn't upset me a handful of times. But for all the reasons listed above, if there's anyone who is allowed to upset me, it's him. If his movies were entirely enjoyable, I probably wouldn't be making a video about him. He wouldn't have the kind of success he has today. I mean, if you're constantly trying to do something new, you're definitely gonna fall on your face a few times. We can sit here and talk about why and how he does what he does in his movies. At the end of the day, it really isn't that difficult to understand. But what I have been trying to grapple with both in this video and for the last 3 years is why I enjoy watching these movies to begin with. I mean, I love horror movies, but I don't love this for the same reasons that I love Black Christmas. The kick I get out of these movies is entirely unique. It goes past the technical achievements, because I don't know if I need to be the one to talk about that at this point. It's enjoying the filthiness and the headache-inducing experience that comes with them. What is wrong with me? Perhaps it's because I don't do drugs, and this is an interesting way of looking into that lifestyle. Perhaps it's just out of excitement that watching something so overwhelmingly haunting is a unique thrill. It's a question I don't want to try too hard to answer, because that unexplainable feeling of why something scratches that itch is what makes art so euphoric every now and then. And on that note, I think for now, I'll just leave it there. Gaspar Noé is to me one of the most fascinating people working in film, and I'm very, very grateful for his work, even if it can be pretty ridiculous and cringeworthy every now and then. So thanks for watching. Go watch a Gaspar Noé film and form your own opinion. And before you head out, I want to thank this week's sponsor, Squarespace. Now, Squarespace, if you didn't already know, is a place where you can go online to build your brand, whether that be an online store, a blog, a portfolio, you name it. They have professional portfolio designs where you can create galleries for your work, as well as password protected pages for clients. Personally, I'm a big fan of their video block feature, which allows me to showcase some of my favorite videos and films in a way that looks really nice. Not to mention, they also have a built-in mobile web designer, which makes it so that any website you make will automatically look great no matter what platform it's on, while still matching your style. The best part about it all, though, is that if you go to squarespace.com/Karsten, my name, you can get 10% off of your first purchase. So really, at this point, no reason not to give it a chance. I'm a big fan of Squarespace, my friends are, my family is, so honestly, you should be too. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you all in the next one.